Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and today we're talking pictures with Paul Bellinger. Uh, we're going to just review and talk about some of the latest guests we've had on the show. Hi, Paul.
How's it going, Ken?
Doing well. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Thanks for having me back. It's been a while. So, what do you want to talk about today?
It's your show. Whatever you want to get into.
All right.
What are,
Well,
what
to
are you,
start
what are your
off,
goals this year? I guess I should ask you before you
my
ask me.
photography. Probably my photography goals would be make some pictures that I want to share with other people and actually start posting them on Instagram again. That's a big deal. I want to get a community together here in Boise so I can do some of the type of fashion photography that I want to do. I need a good hair and makeup artist team and stylists and models. I got to develop that community because it doesn't exist here. And other than that, I want to go through all my street photography and start putting that down somewhere to publishing it somewhere, putting it out there, either on Instagram or on my website or something. Try to like cull that down into some semblance, something that could maybe be like the start of a book. I've got this from my wife's hometown in India that I think ultimately I would like to make a book on her hometown, Hazaribagh. And so maybe it could cull down what I have to like 50 pictures or something already, and then make a plan for that because that's more of like a long term goal. So
Sure.
I'd say those are my goals right now in photography.
Well, that sounds
Try
good.
maybe win a national championship for Nebraska as a fan, something like that. So,
We got to get to
what
a
about
bowl
you?
game first. I got a lot of things in the hopper. I mean, I was at a party a couple nights ago, and people always ask me that. What are you doing? What are you working on? Then they want to like ask me stuff of you know my career and stuff like that, and I always feel like I'm like they're asking me to perform for them. Like tell them interesting stories and stuff, and it gets uncomfortable for me. So that's I don't, I don't, the reason I don't know and I don't really talk about what I'm going to do is because I get these ideas and I don't know which ones are going to pan out or even which ones are going to be interesting to me a week from today. So I guess that's my
Yeah,
long-winded answer.
you're an idea machine. I mean, you crank out ideas like, I mean, on a daily. So, the big struggle for you is just sifting through them all and picking out which one you think you want to really pursue.
I mean, I got
Whereas,
two narrowed down right now, so I'm pretty comfortable with that.
you want to share those or no?
One's a documentary film, so we're in pre-production right now, and it's a film about a photographer who I really admire, and um, we'll probably start shooting about 3 months from now.
Nice, cool. What about anything as far as stills are concerned?
I'm well, I've been doing this magazine for a few years, and I've been doing it, well, like a year, I guess. I don't know, year and a half, and it's been completely anonymous, and so it's kind of the opposite of uh, what a popular medium should be. It's like an unpopular hidden medium. But I think I'm going to start sharing that this year.
Nice. You're going to start sharing it under the Ken Jarecke label.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to put my name on the magazine, but I'm going to start at least letting people know that I'm doing a magazine.
And what is this magazine? What's the type of content in this magazine?
It's whatever I find interesting. I mean, the name of the magazine is Curious, and so it's an ongoing theme that always seems to pop up as we're interviewing photographers. They talk about certain the characteristics that make them a successful photographer, and usually number one on that list is curiosity. So the magazine's called Curious.
Absolutely, absolutely. Curiosity, I mean, you and I have always been talking about that for a long time. You've actually been doing this for a couple of years, at least 3 to 4 years now. Uh, actually, have a couple of copies of the original, the hard copy here. I think this is Curious number one. If anyone can see, this is finger painting by Ken Jarecke on the cover, and then photographed by Ken Jarecke. So I actually came over to your house and I saw this painted on something here. So anyway, the type of photography that's in this, I don't know what the future will hold, but anything that Ken's heart desires. So some street photography, some model photography. That's Curious Volume One. I got Volume Three as well. Some rodeo images. Volume Two, one of my favorites. One of our favorite models, Delilah. I believe this is all Delilah pictures. Oh no, there's some New York street photography in here too.
Yeah, well,
So
that there was a reason for the Delilah one we wanted. She was uh, a young model working. She was living in Billings, Montana, and you could see she had talent and she had abilities, and she was a hard worker. And so we shot this portfolio for her and created an Instagram account, did all that kind of stuff. And it basically, I think within 10 days, I don't know, was it 10 days? Was it 2 weeks before she had a contract with Elite? I don't know. You tell me. I don't remember.
yeah, it was. I mean, she started getting contacted by model agents basically right away, and then it was just a matter of time before she finally settled in and signed a contract with Elite. After she did her due diligence and she met with all the different agencies, did video chats, sent them a bunch of videos and stuff and everything, and then yeah, she signed with Elite like a month later, I think. So
And now I think
yeah,
she's with
she's doing
Elite
great.
International, or you tell me.
She's I want to say with like is she with the society now, which is like Elites International group. I'm not exactly sure exactly what she's up to be honest.
Well, she's doing
Uh
great. That's the important
she's
part.
killing
She's
it.
doing great.
She's killing it. Yep. And she'll be immortalized in the Curious Project volume 2, my favorite issue. So
Well,
there
what
you go.
she needed some good photos. She needed some photos to show, her range and her talent, and that's kind of what we did. So,
Absolutely. So speaking of models and magazines and stuff, I actually saw a tweet today from Greg Marinovich about Vogue Italia. The latest issue of Vogue Italia is not going to have any photos.
yeah.
They basically boycotted photography for this issue, and the claim was that it was about increasing awareness about the environmental impact of photography, of photography shoots. so what's your take on that? What's the hot take from Ken Jarecke?
I mean, it's such a scam. Somebody else gathered all the tweets from the was it Paris Vogue or London Vogue? I forget which. Um, about all the vacations where all the Vogue staff was going to be over the holidays, and they're all going to be in Barbados or here or there, and they're all doing like these exclusive trips at these 4 and 5 star resorts in Switzerland, or the on the beach or wherever they are. And these are the same people that have put photographers and models through the ringer the last probably 10 years. It's gotten so crazy. You shoot an editorial job, and then they pull an advertising shoot out of it with the same it's such an incestuous little nasty business at this point. And um I it's just I think about this and I'm like, I could care less what Vogue Italia does. So what, Stephen Meisel does, his run of covers is over now. What that went like 20, 25 years, whatever. The best thing about, I mean, that was one of the best things. Another good thing is Vogue Italia always uh, had really great insight on what was happening in the larger photography world. But this seems to me, it seems like, you know, it seems what U.S. Vogue has done. It's the same type of foolishness that this idea that fashion photography is all about a fantasy, and fantasies don't work unless the person looking at the images can project themselves into that fantasy. And so when you look at something like the September issue with Anne Wintour, and you're seeing the process behind that and how everything is so heavily photoshopped, and uh, or you see what I mean, it's craziness at this point. And so what you've done is you've made these fantasies that are based in photography unattainable to the viewer, because everything is completely fake and retouched, and it doesn't end with just makeup and styling. It goes into photo illustration with heavy Photoshop. That's Vanity Fair. That's all of them. So at
Yeah.
this point, what they've stopped using photography for its strengths long ago. Photography is based in reality, and it gives people an idea of what they can do as far as fashion photography. It gives them a connection to what they can do. They can take that and bring it into their own world, their own lives. The sweater and the scarf combination or whatever. Well, now it's just about um, creating this perfect world, and then that's reflected in the Instagram feeds of every person, every young person who wants to compete on that level. So they all have their Instagram plugins to tone their and shop their photos like into fantasy land. And so it's just like at this point they've devalued photography so much that to completely remove it from their magazine, they've already removed the value. So who cares if they actually remove the actual photos? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes it just that one additional step more unrelatable because now you're looking at paintings and drawings. It's like even more difficult for a person to connect themselves with those images. I mean, just like you, it's hard to relate to a cartoon. Whereas a movie, it's a lot easier to relate to. It at least looks real. It's real people. It's a real location, whatever the case may be. So I think they've gone even one step further in that regard in devaluing photography and removing the viewer from the images. But to get back to this idea of it being a global climate change kind of argument as to why they want to raise awareness about the environmental impact of photo shoots. I mean, to raise awareness about the environment, I mean, Stephen Meisel has had photo shoots in the past that do a fantastic job of raising awareness about the environment. We did the models covered in oil after the oil spill in the Gulf and things like this. I mean, that's how you use pictures to raise awareness about something. But to simply remove the pictures, it seems definitely like a publicity stunt. And then also it begs the question of, well, why are photo shoots? They make a good point. I mean, you talk about flying all these people around. You talk about the craft services and all the food and all this. Sure, there's certainly the amount of waste that goes on in a photo shoot, just like on any type of project in any field. There's a lot of waste, and so okay, I understand that. But how does pulling the pictures and then for one issue and then going right back to that same type of overblown shoots where you have 30 people on set and you've got 20 different, you've got monitors everywhere and you've got photo retouchers on set. I mean, that's where, I mean, what do you think the difference in today's shoots, the environmental impact, let's say, or the wastefulness or just the amount of money and time and energy spent on them versus a shoot with, Helmut Newton and his wife and one model on location somewhere in some hotel? I mean, so to me the big thing is like they want to raise this issue about how these photo shoots have this environmental impact, but they're the ones that are doing the shoots that have the huge environmental impact by always having to have everyone on set and by always having to have the editors looking at images in real time on monitors and things like that.
Well, all these editors, all these people on set, like you said, there's really only 5 or 6 people you'd ever need on set, and all these other people that are hanging out in craft services and watching a monitor from 30 feet away, and uh, these are the people that don't need to be there, and they shouldn't be there. They make the product worse. They don't make it better. The more fingers you get in that pot, the worse it gets. The more watered down it gets. So if you had if those people were on set with Helmut Newton probably would have not made half the pictures he did. I mean, that's just the bottom line. It's just, if you um, look at it this way: as a photographer, as a model, you're going to get paid a certain rate, and so along with that rate, since that rate isn't really going to change, you can spend a bunch of money on craft services and go out to dinner the night before and stay in a nicer hotel, because all those people on set expect those things. The people on set, the editors, the bosses, um, the consultants from the brands that you're photographing, all those people expect that first class treatment. And so the photographer, the model, they get to like piggyback on board with that. So now not only do you have these extra people involved, your expenses for the shoot have tripled or quadrupled, just because the photographer can justify a $300 meal the night before. Um, and then you have the digital technicians. You have
Yeah,
it's craziness. It has all these things, all this added costs, and if you go back to the environmental impact, all that environmental impact and the added cost have nothing to do with the quality of the photography that's being produced. And in fact, they probably uh, contribute to a lack of quality being produced. They
exactly. That's what's ruining the shoots.
they're the plastic. They're the fakeness that's coming into, when you think of whatever, Mario Sorrente and Kate Moss shooting for a week on their own and
Exactly.
producing one of the most iconic images of fashion photography ever. Um, and you use the Helmut Newton example. Uh, these guys were artists working with their muse, for lack of a better analogy, and they didn't need somebody from Adidas to tell them how their sneakers should look in the photo.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even quite the exact opposite. They would never allow someone like Adidas to come in and tell them anything, and they certainly wouldn't have monitors, everywhere, for everyone to be double checking and checking all that kind of stuff. I mean, we've seen shoots before on Instagram we've looked at where there's just, there's 30 people on set and there's 10 different monitors in different locations and stuff. I mean, just it's not even a photo shoot at that point. It's just it's a branding experience, you know
And
they're doing
the less
video, they're doing
important,
everything.
yeah, the less important the photographer's vision comes, the
I
less.
mean,
I mean, it's just
the
the
photographer is
photographer
no
is
better
just
than the caterer
the
at that point.
photographer is just a part of the service industry that's serving that big machine.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it would be great to see a magazine instead of going the route of, oh, let's just pull all the photos and have drawings and paintings and things. How about do an issue where you went minimalist and you just sent Arthur Elgort a model, maybe one person as a hair and makeup, or maybe a hair person, a makeup person, and a stylist, and that's it, and send them off and see what happens. In fact, you and I were just talking about a magazine that does that. It's called Holiday Magazine. And there was a really nice shoot in there with Laquan Bailey and one of his favorite models, Andrea Diddy, where they traveled all around New Zealand together and they made an amazing, I mean, so many images, 50 images or something he must have posted on Instagram. I guess the spread itself in the magazine, I haven't seen it, but has quite a few images as well. It's several pages. And they basically just did it with a model, a photographer, and a small crew of support staff, and that was it. And I just can't imagine that the environmental impact would be very big on a shoot like that. And the pictures were 10 times. I mean, they stopped us both in our tracks when we saw them. There's so much better than what could be created, on a set with so many people around, with so many different cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Yeah, and they're doing that with a crew that can fit into one van.
Yeah,
You're doing it with a driver plus maybe five other people.
yeah, absolutely.
And maybe instead of one van, you take two vans in case you have a flat tire or something. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just
No, they literally were shooting in one like small Winnebago type retro looking van, which I think had a driver, a photographer, and a model in it. And then they were following with a minivan with the support staff.
yeah.
I mean,
And
that's
where
it.
where did that shoot?
So
Was that in the Netherlands or what? That was in Iceland.
That was in New Zealand, and
Oh, that was in New Zealand.
it's a cool magazine. It's called Holiday Magazine. Frank Duran is the creative genius behind it. He's really smart, really great creative person, and they basically focus on one country in each issue. So that was the New Zealand issue. I just got picked up a copy of the Egypt issue. It's amazing. The pictures are real, and they look great. I mean, and there's some street photography in there. There's a variety of other things in there. Not just It's not a fashion magazine, even though in that case in the New Zealand shoot, you have a fashion photographer and a model, and there was a lot of fashion involved. But it's just as an example of doing a shoot on a small production. And we've already mentioned like the greats, Mario Sorrenti, Helmut Newton, known, especially Helmut Newton was known for never having anyone on set. I mean, as few people as possible.
Yeah, the whole idea of, I mean, if you go back to the film era, the whole idea of showing your contact sheets to a person, that's like bearing your soul. That's like showing your notes. If you're a writer, you're going to show your notes to somebody. And so that person, that photo editor that you worked with, that was a special bond. And the less of a bond you had with a certain photo editor from a certain magazine, the less you'd show them. And where you go, you take what's his face from Austin. You know,
Dan
he'll
Winters.
yeah, he'll Dan will give an editor one option for the cover, one option for the opening spread, and they see they see what they get. That's the final version, the print that they get. Um, that's probably a lot closer to where it should be. Um, you don't want a stranger looking through your contact sheets, and you certainly don't want them looking over your shoulder at a monitor when you shoot at the stuff coming out of your camera. I mean,
Oh, I mean,
it's craziness to me. It's craziness. How could you how cou- how could you compose a piece of music with 20 people watching you in the room and then giving their suggestions?
absolutely. I mean, it just goes to show they don't think of it as music. It's advertising. Um, and so it's all meant to sell something. So they don't think of it as art anymore. It's just how can we get these clothes into the magazine so we can get money from the advertisers.
Well, and that brings up the next question. Is the veil, is the idea that Vogue is going to show us something insightful or something that can inspire us? Is that just completely broken now? Are
Yeah,
the are the
yeah.
are the are the advertising pages, which everybody like to look at anyways? Is that really all that's there? Because the advertising pages are now, actually better than the editorial content, and the editorial content just supports the advertising pages. At what point does it stop? It just becomes, the Sears catalog, and then at that point, why does it exist besides to, you know, just promote whatever their advertisers are paying them to do anyways? I mean, why do they exist? Why do they have to be on set? Why do we need, you know, an Alistair McKim to put the pages together at that point?
Yeah, exactly. Why not just let Louis Vuitton do it,
Well, yeah, if they're if
or
they're if
Gucci?
they're if they're the guys that are really in charge, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, that's and it kind of brings a common theme that we've talked about throughout as well of this whole idea of chimping, looking at the back of your camera. You talk about that all the time. I mean, what do you think about a fashion set where you have a monitor showing the images as you're shooting them? I mean, that's like chimping on steroids.
So there's a lot of things that are wrong with chimping, and most of them, when we have this conversation, when you have this conversation with photographers, or you write an article about it and you talk about, the evils of chimping, they kind of miss the point. The bottom underlying point is that if I'm making a portrait of a person, um, the portrait is a collaboration between me and the person sitting there. Okay, and there's some connection there. There's an exchange of ideas, and the resulting image is what we came up with, or what that person was willing to give me or willing to share, and what I saw. And and then you get into the secondary things like the light or the pose itself, right? Well, with the chimping, what you're doing is, there's always this, and it goes right back to the fashion world. There's always this idea that between the person you're interacting with, there's that reality, and then there's the end product of the actual photograph. The photograph isn't the person. The photograph is a product. It's a product that I'm producing as a photographer. So if I start chimping, what I'm telling that person sitting in front of me that I'm trying to get this exchange with it, I'm trying to have this interaction with, what the nonverbal message is that I'm already seeing you as my end product. I'm not interacting with you as a person anymore. You're my end product. And so that is uh, why you get superficial portraits that don't have a connection between anything. So that's just a portrait situation. You can extrapolate that to a street photography situation,
Yeah. Yeah, we've
or
talked about chimping several times, which is, when you look at the back of your camera while you're shooting. And, we've talked about in journalism, I mean, you're going to miss stuff when you're looking at the back of your camera. You're taking yourself out of the moment. But you're talking about in a portrait situation, it's different. And what it takes you out of the interaction that you're supposed to be having with the subject. And
right,
it sort of objectifies them and
right,
says, here, look, let's, and it puts other eyes in as well. I mean, it just invites all kinds of other problems as well.
right. And so
So it's a
then,
different thing than
right.
in journalism.
So then you take that, so you're doing that portrait, you're doing that fashion shoot, and you take it to the next level where now it's not just me turning that person into a product in the portrait situation. You have a whole room of people, and so it's like, oh, where can we put the headline and the masthead? And blah. Oh, this will work as a double truck, and oh, I'll put some copy here. It's it's a plastic existence that has nothing to do with anything. As far as, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it has something to do with commercial editorial journalism at this point, where if you have Tom Cruise on the cover, then we're going to promote Tom Cruise's next movie. It's not about like what what it's like to be Tom Cruise or hang out with Tom Cruise or
It's not about
think like
anything
Tom Cruise.
real.
It's not. It's about selling a product. So when
Yeah.
you have the screens, the monitors on a fashion set or a high dollar editorial shoot, with uh, a personality, um, it's kind of just saying everybody's in on the joke that this has nothing to do with journalism. This has nothing to do with photography. This has to do with a product. and
Yeah.
and and selling that product. And so, you know, an editorial shoot with Vogue where they're literally shooting the editorial shot at the same time they're shooting the advertising photo that's going to be in the front of the book. Maybe there's really, it couldn't have turned out any other way than to just have this
Mhm.
distilled down to, remove the veneer. It's just about selling product
Yeah.
throughout the whole thing.
Now, of course, like we're talking about probably the most commercialized magazine, Vogue. There are certainly other ones. I mentioned this holiday magazine, where they don't do that kind of stuff, and there are other magazines that are standards in the fashion industry, such as ID magazine, that is that they don't do as much of that kind of stuff. That their shoots are less produced and they do more real photography. They try to be more authentic. Their whole idea in ID magazine is to be an authentic voice in fashion, not to be an over commercialized voice that's bought and paid for by the advertisers.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
there are
I
others.
just I picked up this. You were talking about this latest version of ID, latest issue, and so as a photographer, I look through this and I don't see any images that really that surprise me or are unexpected or that motivate me to go out and try to like do something similar. It's very kind of medium grade to me. And I know, you know,
Mhm.
Uh, Alistair McKim is the editor now and all that kind of stuff, and it's supposed to be like, you know, great and inspiring. But I'm not seeing that. I'm not
Uh-huh.
seeing any next level work. And
Yeah, it
so,
does tend to be a little bit sort of I think they've gone on that sort of like lo-fi approach for a while now. That's been kind of the look in ID. So when you see this latest issue, I mean, it's kind of just like more of the same. It definitely looks different than the other magazines that we've been talking about, the type of images in there. But like you said, are they Arthur Elgort level? Are they Helmut Newton level? Are they inspiring in some way? Are they going to stand the test of time? I agree with you. I didn't see anything in that issue that was,
so
you know,
that's the
mind blowing.
question. Yeah, I mean that's the question. It's like, where's that I, where's that David Bailey type of guy where you know every image, you can see his mark on every image and you're just excited to see what he's done on the next page. So you have these two extremes. You have this corporate kind of editorial photography created by a committee, and then you have ID, which is kind of like you said, kind of low impact, kind of straightforward, white background, one light, or you know, just very
Or
simple kind of
natural light
natural
on the
light.
street.
And so where's the inspiration that comes out? Where who's the photographer that's going to use that platform to move the ball forward? And I don't see that. It's just like two extremes. It's like the lo-fi people that might not know how to use their camera, and you're waiting for like that punk moment where they're going to do something really great, but they don't. And then you have
Yeah.
the other side where you have the high tech, everybody, you know, everything, every pixel is in its place, and every piece of clothes is perfectly styled and all that, and that's uninspiring as well. So the problem is the idea behind the corporate editorial fashion shoot is to sell the product, but the idea behind the punk rock world that should be happening out there, I don't see the idea being. I'm not sure what the idea is, um, or how it's being realized. I'm not sure there's any great idea behind it except, oh, I got my pictures in this magazine.
Yeah. It definitely seems to be a little watered down. I hope that Alistair McKim will, I think ID stands out as being one that's less commercial. And so it's got that going for it. But it also needs to try to do something big, you know?
I mean, there's
So,
okay. So this person on the cover here. Okay, so this person on the cover.
yeah.
And I looked through this. There's probably,
There's a shoot with Zoe Kravitz in there that's pretty solid.
yeah, but that's Mert and what's her face.
Merton Marcus.
So there's page after page of these pole dancing shots, and they lose any. And so this across the spread, it's like that
Hmm.
doesn't work on a magazine spread, but there's just page after page of these, and any impact you'd have from one great image of this gal dancing is lost on that.
Hmm.
So there's just more of, there's probably like 40 or 50 this 40 or 50 page spread, and there's a lot of pole dancing shots instead of one great pole dancing shot. And so that's kind of a hint that there's not an idea behind the there's no concept behind the
Yeah.
shoot.
Yeah, it's sort of like someone just had an idea of like, let's do a pole dancing spread. I mean, just like
I mean,
random idea
there's other
generator.
things in there, but it's not, I mean, it's not, there's no narrative flow to it. There's no, it starts and ends in exactly the same spot, and the viewer has not gone on any visual journey with that spread, and that's a
Yeah,
failure.
absolutely.
It might not be on the photographer's part even, but it's a failure on the editorial side, definitely.
Absolutely. Nice. That was good. So
Well,
we've
it's
been
not.
talking.
I don't know how good it is, but it's like concepts that used to be really common. To go from point A to point B, whether it's you know Avedon. You know, Avedon had some type of idea behind his shoot that he wanted to express. This idea, death in the maiden, whatever. Irving Penn.
Yeah.
What there was this idea behind that, and to be successful in that, um, you had to communicate that idea. So if there's no idea besides, hey, let's get a poll, then what
Yeah.
more can you do? It's going to fail.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it ends up just being sort of like a pick your favorite image of this lineup of 30 and call that. I mean, that's what the viewer's supposed to take away from it, I guess. There is no, like you said, there's no evolution, there's no
No, it's
development.
worse than that. It's worse than that because the editor hasn't picked a favorite image.
Exactly. They just put the best 30 out there and then they put it on you to decide, pick your favorite. And because
Right.
basically, I mean, if I was going to take a picture of one of those on my phone and send it to you, the hardest part would be pick out which one I like the most. But other than that, it's if I sent you 20 of them, they all look the same. You're not going to get anything else. I would only I would only want to pick one and send it to you, which is something that we do all the time.
And so then there's this idea. So what does that say to the advertiser? The advertiser's paying whatever, 250, $350,000 for 2 pages in this magazine. So or more. So what's that saying to the advertiser and the viewer? Is it saying that 40 pages, 30, whatever, 20 pages of the same pole dancing picture over and over again? Um, what does that say to the value of my double page ad for
Yeah,
Gabbana?
exactly. Exactly. If you can't even take the time to cull down these 40 pages down to 5 pages because space is actually very valuable in the magazine, then you're basically sending the signal that if we're going to put 40 pages of similar images, then space isn't worth much in this magazine.
And then is that actually the idea behind it? Because you want to, as far as the editorial content, you just want to lull the viewer asleep so that then when they get to an advertising page, they actually wake up and look at the advertising page. That was probably, you know, the editors of Life magazine, the advertising side back in the day. So what advertisers did when Life magazine was very successful in the 50s and 60s, the advertising would mimic the editorial content of Life magazine. And so the advertisers couldn't keep up with that. They couldn't reach those same levels. And so the advertising side of Life magazine actually asked the editorial side of Life magazine to water down their content so the advertising
Stand
would
out.
stand out. So is that what's happening here? I don't know. I'm just
I don't know. It is interesting. I mean, ID magazine has a lot of things going for it. I do think the fact that they even have stories that are that long, that many images, like that's the bar is set so low that is that's a positive thing that you even get 40 pages anymore in any type of magazine. But I mean, to do so little with those 40 pages, I mean, they really have fallen short.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's Time Magazine doesn't have 40 pages. Sports Illustrated. I mean, what
No,
those?
you never get that. You never get that many pages. Who did that shoot?
Oh, I don't remember. I'll look it up.
But
Vanderpeer,
okay, yeah,
Willie
Willie
Vanderpeer.
Vander. Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. ID Magazine is also kind of a place where unknown photographers can get their work in, but then like you see the big cover shoots and things like that are done by pretty famous photographers like him and Merton Marcus. All right, well, let's get off of fashion
Let's
and
stop
magazine,
stop
random
burning
magazines.
bridges.
Yeah,
Stop
we're definitely
stepping
never
on
going to work for
toes.
them. Hey, I can tell Alistair McKim that if you want to get some good ideas in your magazine, definitely look no further than Ken Jarecke. Uh, he comes up with 10 ideas before breakfast that are better than that. So, moving on to something else, a little more of a somber topic. We got some things happening in the world today uh, with Iran. And being that some people will call you a war photographer, a conflict photographer, I want to get your take on, you know, so to put it in perspective, the head of the Quds Force was just killed yesterday. What's his name? Soleimani.
Yeah.
And and it was, a deliberate assassination, by the U.S. government of this high-ranking person, maybe the second most powerful person in Iran. And from a photojournalism perspective, like what's happening right now? What kind of wheels are set in motion? What's going on? What are people like David Buto and these other people who may be ultimately going out to Iran or to Iraq to photograph this conflict? What are they starting to think about? Like, what's a war photographer think about when you see stuff like this happen?
Well, I mean, war photography has probably, I don't know, 30 years ago, people were complaining that war photography is just like a puff of smoke on the horizon. And so when you have, missile launches and that kind of stuff, that kind of, uh, that's the epitome of that. It's just, what do you photograph at that point? So it's not really war photography. It's after war photography. It's reaction photography. So you're not photographing the actual war. You're photographing um, the the results of that military action. And so as
Yeah,
if I was thinking about this, I'd be trying to figure out, okay, where are things going to happen next? How is that how are they going to be affected? All that kind of stuff. Um, like the top, the top.
I mean,
I want to say the
we
top out of the holiest Shia sites, um, which Iranians basically Shia um, are in Iraq, and so there's and those pilgrimages to those two sites have been going on. Uh, I don't think they even stopped during the Iran-Iraq war. I could be wrong about that, but they've been going on through peace times and war times with these two countries for ever. So um, you're going to still have Iranian pilgrims coming across to Iraq, and um, that's for a Western photographer. Those kind of places, uh, to work on the streets, to work in those communities is very difficult right now. To like to talk
yeah,
about this relationship between the two people of those two countries, and I mean, we got this all goes back to, if you want to, you can talk about Jimmy Carter here, and the reason Saddam Hussein came to power was, the philosophy of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing.
Mm.
And so, under the Reagan administration, as a result of the Iranians taking the U.S. embassy and all that mess, under Carter, was to give agricultural loans to Saddam Hussein, which he used to, war with the Iranians. So that was a terrible. That was a brutal war, and people don't. I mean, if you go
Yeah.
to Basra in Iraq, you'll see there's rows of statues of Iraqi martyrs, military officers who were killed, and they're all pointing across the water to Iran. Like symbolically saying "keep attacking" type of thing. And both sides did like these horrific. They'd use children to sweep minefields. They would capture prisoners and drive over them with their vehicles to kill them. Captured prisoners, this type of thing. It was brutal. It was like, just like
Yeah.
barbarian time. So does any of that make any sense, for a Western photographer to try to photograph? Is it even possible? What could happen, or what is happening, or do you try to look at, like, okay, as a photographer, do I want to find that Arab slash Persian community where those two communities meet in some place like France or Spain or something like that? Is that a story I could tell where, you have an Arab and a Persian community, you know, filled with Iraqis and with Iranians who are kind of living side by side in other places in the world? Is that a story to pursue? That would be something I'd think about. Um, I don't think
Good
there. I
idea.
don't think. I don't think there's anything, in the way of like working around the White House to try to illustrate this. There's some great photographers on the White House beat, and they might make a revealing picture, or an interesting picture at least. But I'm not sure that adds to the story. Um, do you want to work in Tehran? I mean, that's a dicey proposition as well, because they're they don't really like journalists, and they might let you in, but they might not let you out. I don't, you know, I
So
if I was the editor, managing editor of a
that's
news
exactly what I was
magazine,
going to ask.
right? Okay, um, it's kind of a word story at this point, and so it's kind of like that situation as far as photography is concerned. Is uh, It comes down to that, like, uh, the symbolic picture. It's like you shoot pictures. 30 years ago, you shoot pictures of Bill Clinton and just waiting for a shot of him to go, scratch his forehead, and maybe it's
uh,
just his. Maybe he has an itch on his forehead and he's just scratching his forehead, but he looks perturbed, or he looks worried, or he looks like he's got a migraine. It comes down to those type of photos that, everybody shoots, and then the word people kind of like put them, uh, use them to justify whatever context they want to put the current political situation in. Is there something on Capitol Hill? I don't think so. I mean, I just because it's gotten so ridiculous at this point. It's really hard to work in that.
yeah.
Look at Doug Mills' picture of Nancy Pelosi during the last State of the Union address. Okay, um, so he made this, really a nice frame of her clapping, and when it happened, to me, just as a watching the State of the Union address, I thought she was trying to emphasize her support of whatever that statement that the President Trump had just made. But
Yeah.
the image was spun into this, and Alexander Pelosi, said, "Oh, that's my mom being," to paraphrase her, "Oh, that's my mom," that's her uh, sarcastic pose type of thing.
Yeah.
And
Defiant.
so, right, defiant, sarcastic, condescending, whatever. So that image itself immediately got spun in two different directions. So what can you
Absolutely.
do as a photographer working in Washington, D.C.? Um, I don't.
There's definitely going to be some hearings, like Senate Intelligence Committee is going to hold something. I mean, there's going to be some votes on, war resolutions and things like that, that maybe those would be something. I know that, the majority leader and the minority leader in the Senate, they both, spoke on it today already. So, you could have got some pictures from that. But what do you think about, I mean, not in
Well, you
DC,
can't.
like,
You can't.
okay, so,
You can't. You can't make still the only, on this in the Senate floor of the Senate. There's no still photography allowed there, except on the State of the
okay.
Union address. That's just the
Oh,
Senate rule, and so you're not even going to see that. And so that's when the best thing. That's when you need a Steve Crowley. Okay, Steve Crowley just lurking in the hallways of the Senate or the Capitol building or wherever he ends up
uh,
on Capitol Hill. That's when that's when you need those photographers that really know that place and know the players and can read between the lines. And those are kind. I mean,
mhm,
Crowley's retired from the New York Times. Um, you, it's really kind of one of those investments that a newspaper has to make over 30 years to have a person in place that can make those kind of pictures. So I guess we're getting kind of sidetracked, but
no, that's important. I mean, he's mentoring some young photographers and stuff, but I mean, there's no replacing him today. Like you said, it takes 20 years of walking those halls
and
to
there
know
are
what's going
good
to
people
happen and
there
when.
yeah there's great people following in his footsteps. um and maybe they will start putting together a body of work that really kind of speaks to what's happening in the broader sense of the broader world itself. I don't We'll
So,
see.
but going back to that idea of, if you're a photo editor, not thinking about maybe even just today. Well, even just today, I mean, are you sending people to Iraq today? Are you sending, like, 1998 Ken Jarecke to Iraq today? Are you sending him someplace to get, suited up and get his gear together, or what are you thinking?
Well, I've kind of been off the grid for a couple of days, so I haven't even looked at. I saw a couple pictures from the embassy itself in Baghdad. Um, that's kind of over with now, that part of it. But
Yeah.
that was there were certainly opportunities there if you were on the ground. Um,
So, if you were an editor, you probably say whoever your photographer is that's already over there somewhere, you'd be, you know, sort of starting to send, get them all going in the same direction towards Iraq, basically.
no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I don't, I'm not sure about that. I
Mhm.
I mean, if you go to Iran, what are you going to get? You're going to get staged protests, that happen on schedule, and the
Yeah.
the American flag gets stomped on, and a, a, I mean, do you need more of that? Is that insightful? Does that help you? Um, I got to believe there were some great images made of the embassy itself, of that, and
During the protests and all that were happening.
well, during the attack on the embassy, and then I guess the embassy was liberated at some point. So I mean, who knows? I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen anything. Just um, I haven't really dug that deep, but I haven't seen anything. You know, I've seen better pictures coming out of Australia. I mean, some of those pictures are pretty amazing,
Hmm.
but I haven't really
Yeah,
looked either.
yeah, yeah. Well, and this is just happening like today, yesterday. So we'll see.
So there's a funny story. There was a Sigma photographer, and he when Jimmy Carter tried to rescue the hostages, and he sent two helicopters to Iran. Um, the Sigma photography in Iran was working there, and so he wrapped himself up in like uh, local local garments, and he bought a bicycle with a basket on it, and he cut a hole in the basket, put a camera in there, and he rode his bicycle past the wreckage of the two helicopters twice. So he shot like two frames. I think John Louis Atlan is his name.
Wow.
And so of course that was like, that was that was big. That was, these were the only pictures of these downed helicopters in Iran.
That was
And
badass.
yeah, and so after that, John Louis could Sigma said you can have any post in the world you want, and he decided to be the Sigma photographer in Washington D.C., and that's where he went after that, which is kind of ironic to go. We're talking about what would you do on the battlefield and what you could possibly accomplish in Washington D.C. right now, to see that you know this is a guy who actually did that.
Wow. Wow. That's nuts. And he chose to go to DC.
He chose to go to D.C., and it was Jean Louis. I mean, he's retired now, but he's an inspiration, because he was a photographer who would actually get into more trouble than me, and he just
That's saying a lot.
he just had he had I mean, he's a great photographer, he's a great person, he's a wonderful person, but he was always just like always pushing the boundaries. And one time it was funny because we were in New Hampshire somewhere. I don't even remember what year this was, but when you go from Iowa to New Hampshire, usually you pick up the Secret Service detail after the Iowa caucus. You usually pick up your Secret Service detail in New Hampshire. The front runners, pick up a Secret Service detail. So Iowa is kind of wild, because you don't
Yeah.
there's no real control. There's like maybe local cops sometimes, or um, with bigger candidates with more money, they might have their own like detail or whatever. But most of the candidates don't really have anything. If you're in the, if you're a Senate or a congressman, you might have like a Capitol Hill policeman traveling with you. That's it. But as soon as you get to New Hampshire, you get a real Secret Service detail. And so we literally went from Iowa to New Hampshire, and I think it was a Jesse Jackson event. And so Jesse had Secret Service in New Hampshire, but John Louis still kind of didn't quite realize that the transition had taken place. And I remember 4 Secret Service agents literally just picking him up like, uh, a drunk in a bar, like, and literally carrying him out like a suitcase and throwing him out of an event. Just 4 guys, boom. That's when
That's
it was funny
hilarious.
at the time. I guess it's still funny.
So he didn't realize that what he was doing in Iowa was going to get him in big trouble when he got to New Hampshire.
Right. Once the professionals were on the scene.
I bet he learned that lesson pretty fast then.
Nah, I mean, John, yeah, he was always getting into that kind of stuff. So we should
Ah,
call
that's
him
funny.
up and get him on the show.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you got to get Crowley, you got to get John Louis. You got a lot of these people that come up in passing. Now, you definitely Crowley's been coming up over and over, so we got to get them on.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so okay, let's get into some of these previous podcasts. Let's try to bite off 3 of them. We got 6 that we haven't covered yet, you and me. I'll try to get through them kind of fast. I won't go into too many details. I want you to tell some stories. Um, let's talk about Youngie Kim
Okay.
to begin with.
Okay.
Um, so Youngie was on the podcast. She was very humble, I think, and almost bashful, which is surprising from all the stories I've heard. That she didn't really want to talk about herself too much, and she didn't really want to embellish many of her stories. So I kind of want you to go through some of these things. First thing is, what does it tell you about Youngie that her first overseas assignment was Somalia?
Well, I think, I mean, talking to Youngie, she knew that, and I guess we all knew that the difference between being the in the top 25% at your newspaper, and being that top 5% at your newspaper, those one or two people at your newspaper, that those determinations are made by overseas assignments. And
Mhm.
so, she was at Boston Globe, and Stan Grossfeld was her boss and her mentor at the Globe. And Stan had made his Pulitzer, made his name for himself, and uh, got to the level he was by, his coverage from Ethiopia during the famine, and like, this is like 78, 79, something like this. I'm maybe it was
Okay,
80. I'm not sure when that was.
we won't hold you to the dates.
Okay, but anyway, so she had a clear example of what it took to get to that next level in the newspaper world. And I don't think Youngie ever thought about being a magazine photojournalist. I think she was very, uh, proud to. I know she was very proud to be at the Boston Globe, and she worked her way to the top of that paper, and she did that through her courage and the photographs she made overseas. That's how she got to that level. Um, she's not, I mean, the best photographers, they don't really. Um, there's the self promoters out there, and we know, how they are, and how, you know they operate, and how the image is always kind of about them, or how it's going to play out in their picture contests of that year. And then you have the people like Youngie, who never she it was all about the pictures, it was all about the subject, it was all about the story that she witnessed and then wanted to share with people. And those are your best photographers, and somehow they make the most lasting images, in my opinion. um, so that's who Youngie is, as far as that goes. She's
Yeah,
she knows that it's about the photographs and the people in her photographs. It's not really about her.
but just thinking about this idea that you've been shooting for Boston Globe, you've been shooting a lot of domestic stuff, and then your first overseas assignment is one of the most dangerous places that's going through a crisis. I mean, it's very difficult to go there under any circumstances, and to do that as a photojournalist brings all kinds of additional dangers. I mean, the assignment itself is like a pretty dangerous one. It's not like there's a side that you can embed yourself in a situation like a famine, that's going to give you protection, like being embedded with U.S. forces or something like that in a conflict. There's really no one there to help if things go bad. So just kind of like, what does that say in terms of like foreshadowing her career and the things to come after that? I mean, she's always shown such amazing courage in Iraq and Afghanistan, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it set the tone for her entire career. And this is the thing, and this is something that, photographers don't, I think, really plan out. What happens is they get into habits. And so if you get in the habit of, knocking on those doors that you aren't supposed to knock on, or walking down those streets you aren't supposed to walk on, um, and then then you extend that to like going places where you shouldn't go. It becomes a habit, and you don't know, you don't even realize, I think, to some level, that this is this is unreasonable behavior. um
Hmm.
it's what you're used to. And so,
Yeah.
people ask you questions like, oh, how did you feel when you saw this, or how did you feel when you did that? And the only way is to somehow try to relate it to, okay, say somebody lives in Alaska. You wouldn't say, you wouldn't the person who walks out and it's 20 below zero for 20 days straight through the whole month of February, it's no it, it's normal. It's normal behavior to walk out in that freezing cold.
Yeah.
But if you were living in Florida and you flew up to Alaska and you had to walk outside in 20 below zero cold, you'd think that, the world is ending.
Yeah. You think
um,
this is nuts?
this is crazy. Why is this happening? Well, for the photojournalist that's going into Iraq or Iran or whatever, and who knows where people are going today, um, it's 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 normal behavior. It's a habit.
Mhm. No, that makes sense. And she talked about, kind of getting she had to get out of there. Then she had to make the decision. Is she going to stay? Is she going to go back? Is she going to go? And you brought up this idea of getting on the plane. Like, what happens when you get on the plane? Like, seems like the most important decision you make is when you decide to get on that plane and go. And once you do that, Youngie, yourself, other photojournalists, um, it's sort of like you're in, and you have to finish the job. You have to go through with it.
Well, that's the thing. Everybody gets to that point where they have to make that decision, and um, once they've made that decision, where you're literally um, doing something that you can't, regardless of how you figure it out, it doesn't really make sense. The only thing that makes sense is, this needs to be done, and this is what I'm supposed to do. But if you would talk to your parents or something, they'd say, "Don't. That's crazy. Don't do that." Everybody
Yeah,
gets into that point where they have to make that decision, and I know people who've made the other decision who never leave their hotel room.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So Youngie's definitely the type that is gonna get on the plane and she's gonna make the pictures.
Well, yeah, and most of the people, Steve Crowley's made that decision. Nobody knows that Steve Crowley went to Afghanistan.
Hmm.
He's not known. He's known for Capitol Hill. He's known for Washington D.C. But Steve Crowley made that decision, and I mean, and I don't want to tell his stories, but it's he's a guy who you wouldn't think has ever had to make that decision. Um, he was in another situation where he, wrote the goodbye letter, you know, and so uh,
Yeah,
these are the quiet photographers who are there to make pictures. They're there to tell other stories, not to, like, you know grandiose themselves. That
hmm,
and they're the ones that make lasting images.
yeah. So talking with Youngie, a lot of common themes came up that we've talked about before, that other photographers have mentioned before. The whole idea of being curious and curiosity, she emphasized as being one of the most important things that a photographer can have. She mentioned the art of hanging out, something that Todd Bigelow mentioned that phrase, I think, the first time on the podcast. So those are things that we've talked about before, but I wanted you to maybe embellish her stories a little bit. Um, she told about how she got into Iraq through, was it through Syria? And she had to
I think
walk.
she was, well, where she went into Iraq. It's kind of like it's kind of like Carter Lake. It's like, uh, not only is it swampy and next to the river, but the borders there are very, they're not fluid, but they're, you could walk across part of Syria to get back to Turkey to go into Iraq, that type of thing. So
Uh-huh.
um, I think she ended up in Syria a little bit, but she actually crossed from Turkey, and I think it, and I think it was a deal where to get to this part of Turkey, you had to cross over into Syria, type of thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and I don't remember the exact details, but there's the stories online, and the uh, the thing with that was for Youngie. I mean, she told it all. It's
She
like
did it all on foot, but what was the outcome of it? That was the main thing that was kind of missing from that story, was that uh, she ultimately got in. I mean, she's never been really deterred, you know. So then ultimately, what happened? That's basically what I wanted to get to.
well, she got into Iraq, and she was
And
in.
then you met up with her or something, or
Oh, I met up with her in Afghanistan once, which was a similar situation. But in Iraq, I don't even remember what year that was, but she ended up in Iraq, and uh, there was a American invasion coming in, and she made her way to Baghdad, and she photographed what she could on the road, and did her
wow,
coverage. And I know she ended up in Baghdad at the end, because I remember some pictures of like the looting
that's so
of the
crazy.
National Museum and stuff like this.
So she
Uh,
came all the way from far north, all the way down to Baghdad,
right,
basically just. I mean, she was on foot, and I'm sure she must have hired a driver or something at some point
right.
once she got in the country. But still, I mean, that's a ridiculous story. Tell us about the Afghanistan one. You met up with her in Afghanistan after she was again like out on foot or something.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't. She told me the details about that, but at the time, I just realized that she was she came in to. So that's a good example. There are a bunch of people in Kabul that never left their bureau, never left the streets of, the safe places, so relatively safe places in Kabul, and they uh, they weren't impressive journalists. They just, and then you have Young Yi, who isn't getting any attention and is out searching for the story in the mountains of Afghanistan, you know, with another journalist. And so I was doing this story, and so I was in Kabul, and she showed up, and she was, I mean, she she had lost a little weight, and she looked a little rough around the edges, but that's just. And I said, "Where have you been sleeping?" And she said, "I've been sleeping under a tarp in the mountains," that type of thing. And
Wow.
and that's who she is. That's what it takes. I mean, and the story, ironically, the story she ended up telling was uh, of a widow in Kabul who she met, and just this story, this woman trying to raise, I think, two children, and as a
Hmm.
widow in Afghanistan, it's
Yeah.
not easy.
So the pictures that she made in the mountains, um, with the tarp and all of that. I mean, did those not even pan out, or
I don't remember. I just
yeah?
um
And then how did you get to Afghanistan in that story?
well,
First class direct flight from New York to Kabul.
no. Oh, it
And
was.
Youngi's walking in on foot.
I mean, it's almost that bad. It's almost that bad. But um, I mean, mine's a long story. Mine was I was the photographer, and the story. was about this young woman who had left Afghanistan as a child, as like a 2-year-old child, 3 years old, and her parents had fled Afghanistan. So I went, basically, I was there as not only the photographer, but I was there as kind of uh, the fixer type of guy, the guy that would take care of stuff. And
Hmm.
so I traveled back to Afghanistan with her and her mother. So they were going back to revisit Afghanistan. And the third person that I was there to kind of mind and take care of was the managing editor of US News and World Report. So I was the photographer on one side, but I was also there to kind of keep people out of trouble.
Yeah.
And because for
Had you been
whatever,
there?
I hadn't been there. But so we went to Pakistan to figure out how exactly we were gonna get into Afghanistan. And so there was a single UN flight coming every day, going in every day. And so and then you could hire a driver. And so I started, um, we're in Islamabad, and I started interviewing drivers to, take the traditional route through the Kabul Pass up in Afghanistan type of thing. And I didn't feel, I didn't want to take one vehicle. I wanted to take two vehicles, even though there were only four of us. And I didn't get like a great a feeling of competence from any of the drivers. And so uh, I just said, well, let's just get on this UN flight, which you're always, as a journalist, you're kind of on standby on these UN flights. And so we might have had to wait an extra 2 days, but we got in on a flight from Islamabad to Kabul instead of driving in, which was just the most safe and practical way to go. And then we visited her relatives who are still in the country, and just, her mom went back to like the palace of the king, places like that, and just, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the
Didn't you have some trouble getting in the country though? Like you didn't have your passport, or she didn't have a Iranian passport, or
no, we had no trouble. We had no trouble getting in, but the woman, she traveled. She's an American citizen, but she decided to travel because she was so excited about going back to her birth country. She decided to travel as on her Afghani papers, and so she had no problem getting in. And her mother traveled on an American passport, but they didn't want to let her out. And
uh,
so I mean, not to like, I mean, so we got into to Kabul, and for some reason she didn't want to stay there, and so we were there for like one day, and she wanted to go home, but and just for whatever I don't, it's not my business, but she didn't want to stay there anymore. And so, and I'm like, geez, I've come all the way to Afghanistan, and I'm going to spend one day here, which was kind of a bummer. But since she had traveled on her Afghani papers, they wouldn't let her leave. So, so I actually got to stay there longer. And so then that's how the story came about.
that's when
That's
you
how,
ran into Youngie and all that.
yeah. So, and everybody, Barbara Davidson was in town. Lots of journalists were in town. And so,
So okay, cool.
so then, I mean, just to, so we stayed there maybe a week is all. And I never got to leave the city, and never got, and so my routine every day was to go out at sunrise and just walk and make pictures, and then try to help her when, later in the day after breakfast, try to help her get her papers in order. So, and then we, did, and so we continued to do things, around the city, you know.
Yeah. Gotcha. Did that story run?
Oh yeah.
Nice. Nice.
It
Because
turned
yeah, I
out to
know
be a
you've
good
had some.
story. It turned out to be a good story.
Nice. Yeah, I know you've had situations before where you've gotten into those, and it's been a whole process to get somewhere, and then the pictures don't end up even running, or they get bumped for something else that happens last minute.
No, I mean the funniest thing about it is, so I bought I bought 3 bottles of Black Label in England when our flight, these Pakistani flights, that got delayed 24 hours to start with. So we're just
Mm.
like always, we're always behind schedule, and we're always like at the mercy of some other entity. But so I picked up three bottles of Black Label in England, because I knew I that's something that is very valuable, when you're going to certain parts of the world. And so I I so they have this way that they like search your bags in some airports. So coming into Pakistan, I kind of maneuvered my booze around so that they didn't find it. So then I took that same booze, I took that to Afghanistan on the UN flight. So now I had 3 bottles of Black Label to use for whatever I needed in Afghanistan. And so that's
For
like,
bribes.
well, it's very valuable. So that's how, I could get us all the hotel rooms we needed, and things like that. And
Gotcha.
so it also came in handy with Young Yi, because she was, she was tired.
She needed some Black Label after where she had been.
Right.
That's hilarious. So getting back to Youngie, she photographs a lot of protests these days. That seems to be one of, she's kind of almost typecasted herself as a protest photographer now.
Yeah, I
Is
don't
she
know.
working
I
on a
don't know if
book?
she, well, she should be. And I don't know if she really typecast herself. It's just one of those things. It's like a habit. Like, again, it's a habit. So it's like, you can go out and, I'm in Montana. You can go out and shoot pictures of horses. Um, and then it's like not interesting after a while. So you want something. So instead of shooting horses, you shoot a rodeo. And so, um, Youngie, instead of, walking out, she's done some great work around Coney Island lately in her neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it's an ongoing project. But kind of to spice up that everyday work from just, what is essentially street photography in your own neighborhood, she'll do the protest or whatever now and then.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, she's made some amazing pictures of protests, so I think she's definitely has a, hopefully, a book in the future all around that theme.
Well, Youngie should have. I mean, all these people should have books. Youngie should definitely have a book of her. She's created this amazing body of work
Yeah,
that should be recognized and archived and available, um, to inspire young journalists. Just, nobody really. I guess they know her, but then nobody knows her path, and the what she went through to get where she is today.
yeah. Yeah. So speaking of what some young people can learn, from her photography, a couple of little things that she mentioned, kind of in passing, was this idea of photographing signs at protests. And she mentioned photographing signs being one thing, and then also photographing tear gas as being a second thing. And kind of, she just mentioned it in passing, but my take was that those are kind of like low hanging fruit at a protest event, that you're going to find some tear gas and it's going to be fairly easy to photograph that. And then same thing that, there's all these crazy signs. So what's your take in general on, photographing words, photographing signs at protests, photographing words in general?
Yeah, I mean, so when Youngie is talking about photographing signs or tear gas, that's basically my interpretation of that is that's what she's doing while she's observing. She's not really she's not really overly interested in it's really what's leading her. It's giving her something to do. It's keeping her um, focused while she's finding that other picture. That's my way. And so when you say low hanging fruit, yeah, that's low hanging fruit. But so Youngie, it's all about pattern recognition and figuring out what's going to happen. And then even that the picture, we talked about of the guys, crying. She was in the middle of a crowd and she stood there for 45 minutes waiting for that moment to happen, 3 feet away from those
Hmm.
guys. So that's her observation. That's where her, you know, her her greatness comes from. That ability to just see and be patient and hang out. So it's curiosity, it's observation, and then it's just hanging out. So, but as far as like signs and stuff like that, um, and my point of view, I don't want to put any words in Youngie's mouth, but for me, it's like
Yeah.
signs. Anytime you're using a words, it's kind of a problem because then it's like it's not about the photograph anymore, it's about reading the words. And so even like if it comes to a caption, I'm really careful with captions because I don't want people to just glance at the photograph and then go and read the caption and then they think they understand what's happening in the photograph. So you got to be careful with photographing words in that way. And
Yeah.
even
That's kind of,
even if you're in Tehran today and photographing that government sponsored protest, all the signs are going to be in English. It's like
hmm
it's it's a way for people to get their message out that doesn't really have anything to do with what you might be interested in as a photographer.
gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing I noticed when I've photographed few marches and things like that. It's like while you're standing around, you're waiting for something to happen, you see these signs, and it's just really easy to just take a shot of them just for like record. There was this sign that said this, but
It's the same
they
way with
never look good.
kids. Yeah, it's the same way
I mean,
with kids. Then you get a kid at a protest, and you get a kid holding a sign in English. The kid has no idea really what the protest is about, has no idea what the sign, but it's like a created photo op to, you know,
yeah,
you got to, as a journalist, you just got to, be careful with that kind of stuff.
you got to see past that.
Yeah.
Okay, another thing about Youngie, she talked about the difficulty of photographing in Chinatown in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
and she said because people kept telling her no pictures. How would you deal with that situation? What's
There's all different ways to deal with it, but for me to deal with it is completely different from Young because, Young is Korean. They see that she's Korean, and there's going to be some bias there based on that. Okay.
Mhm.
So and there's no way. I mean, so sometimes, you know, that will be an advantage to her. In Chinatown, it's a disadvantage. So sometimes, as a white male, have an advantage. Uh, in that situation, I would have an advantage as a white male because then they think, oh, he's a tourist. Oh, he's not. He's he might be a cop. He might be uh, a real estate developer. Who knows? He might be from the important newspaper, whatever. So they would actually have more. Um, I would get a little bigger pass than she would in that particular situation. I'm
Absolutely.
guessing.
Yeah, that's what I would guess as well. That's why I wanted to get at, like, why was it such a problem for Youngie in particular? Because in general, I mean, PFJs especially, like, I don't see them being super responsive to someone when they say no pictures, please. I mean, that's sort of like in one ear, out the other. I would assume for PFJs, but she said that was actually. I mean, she talked about that kind of at length. So I was really kind of surprised that that would be such an issue. Especially like in general, I've found that when I've been in Chinatowns, variety of them, if I almost feel like I have, I mean, that it's easier to photograph than almost anywhere else. Like like photographing in Chinatown, San Francisco versus downtown San Francisco. To me, it's like so much easier in Chinatown.
Yeah,
There's a lot more going on, obviously, too, so that makes it easier. Maybe it's they go together. That's why I get that feeling. But I never had a single person say no pictures,
yeah.
so I thought that was kind of interesting.
No, and it was a big deal for her, and she figured out a way to get around it and still make her pictures, but it wasn't easy, but they didn't know.
In a way, the pictures ended up really nice. I mean, the challenge. I mean, shooting. She shot like through the bus windows and and through doorways and stuff. I mean, it's interesting how sometimes a challenge like that you think is really gonna you know be a major obstacle and prevent you from doing making the pictures you want because in your head you have some idea of like what a Chinatown picture should look like, but then when you get there and working situation on the ground is different. It forces you to adapt and evolve. And actually, I mean, in that case, the pictures turned out really great. I mean,
Yeah, and
probably
that's
better
and
than
that's
what she would have
right, and that's the
done
the
otherwise.
the unexpected consequences that you don't, when for me, when you have that barrier, it forces you to get creative and see things in ways that you normally wouldn't, and that's, I think, exactly what happened to Young Gi in Chinatown.
Yeah. So in that situation, do you have to get people's names or something, for like for a caption or something like that for it to run, or do you have to get? So you don't have to get signed releases or anything like that.
No, you don't have to get signed releases. It's if it's editorial in nature. Different publications will have different rules. The New York Times, they might require everybody to get names and ages and a contact info and that kind of stuff. I don't know what their rules currently are. It depends, if that single person is the main focus of the photograph, but if there's three people in the photograph, you might not have to get, they're just different rules.
What was your working sort of like what was your procedure on that kind of thing? Do you ever get people's names and stuff? I mean,
No,
pretty
I mean,
rare. I mean, I've never
no, I'm
seems like
not.
an afterthought for you at least.
Yeah, I mean, I never did, and even like, so I learned from Gil Perez. I asked him what to do. When you're doing like early newspaper photography and wire photography, you always have to get those names. And I'm like, as soon as I stop to get names, it's like I missed something, or it's always just kind of a hassle. I asked Gil, early on. I said, "What did you do?" He said, "If I ever have to do that, I hire an assistant to do that." So that assistant would follow you around and get those names and get those contact information. And so I've done that several times in the past, when a magazine or needed, for whatever reason to do that, I'd say, okay, I'm gonna have um, an assistant, you're going to pay for that and they're going to do that. And then what we'd also do, before digital, then the assistant would have a Polaroid camera, so they could make a Polaroid of that same person to go along with the information. So when you looked at your film later, you could match up the two without any mistakes.
Gotcha. Wow, that seems like a hassle. Especially, I mean, it would depend on the story that you be working on, but obviously in a conflict situation, it's like stuff's happening. But even just in street photography, I mean, I can imagine making a picture of someone doing street photography and then sort of like take yourself out of that whole photographer mode and be like, now I'm going to be like friendly guy that comes and gets your name. And who would even give you their name in today's world? I mean, they don't want they don't even want you taking their picture, much less they're not going to give you their name and their age. you know
Right, right. Well, usually what you're doing is you're like going into neighborhoods or communities, and you get somebody that's really good at like talking to people, and so
mm,
they become like your ambassador. And you know, and you just kind of let them do their thing, and then you kind of work as a team in that way.
Okay. Yeah, like you can tell them, "Hey, I shot some people over there. Go get their names."
Right.
But that way you don't have to.
Right. But it works both ways, because then they're like, "Oh, I met this person over here, and they said they're doing a barbecue in their backyard, and they want you to come over for a few minutes." So, you know.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So sometimes it actually
Oh yeah.
results in cool.
Right.
Okay. Nice. No, that's a good thing to clear up. I wasn't sure about that. That's one thing. You've never been big on captions and stuff, and I see some people on Instagram, um, like Christopher Morris. Sometimes he posts the thing where it has like the little frame and it has very little info as well. And obviously they're like crazy conflict situations, so you wouldn't expect them to be getting people's names, and it's just a soldier, or whatever. Um, so anyway, so that when Young Yu brought that up about having trouble, I thought maybe she had to get their permission eventually or something, or that was a problem.
No. And you know, today it's like, even like, you know, it's like, "Oh, what's your Instagram?" And so you have that connection, and you kind of have, you know, so you're, or they just get your Instagram, and so then they can, you know, message you or whatever. You know, you just, there's a lot of
Well,
options today, and but not for newspaper work. You kind of just have to, depending on the publication.
okay, yeah, because I did notice thinking back on it now when there's some people that play basketball football and they'll do pictures in the stadium, fans beforehand and stuff like that. And then when they post it on Instagram or for the Omaha World Herald, it's they have the name and the ages of the people in those pictures, like, Joe
Right.
and John Smith and age 33, whatever. And I just think to myself, I mean, on a game day, I've never like really talked with any of the fans. I mean, I'm
Sure.
shooting constantly. I never would stop shooting to get a name or an age from someone.
Yeah.
It's like because it's basically there's something happening all the way through for 12 straight hours.
Well, that's the thing with it's their newspaper style, but also they know that, as far as online traffic goes, that if you do a slideshow and you have names with every slideshow, that probably every one of those people are going to share that slideshow, and their
Hmm.
relatives. I mean, it's, you know, it's,
Gotcha.
um,
It's playing the
so I
game.
have to, yeah, I have another meeting right now.
Oh, really? Okay.
So
Wow, we only got through one photographer. That was my last question about Youngie. Jesus, we're gonna take forever to get through. I got Barbara Villette and Rick Smolin. We still haven't talked about this. We're gonna have to dedicate a whole thing to this because
absolutely.
he's got the craziest stories, and I mean, I want to get him on again and stuff. And um, anyway, but that's fine. You want to go now then?
Yeah, I got to go, but I'll put a link to that. I didn't show you this. This is the latest issue. Did I show you that?
No. Uh, Maybe you sent me the link to it. Actually, I need to go buy it once you put the
I'll
hard
put the
copy
link
version up.
on there. Yeah, I'll put the hard version up there. But so I'm going to try to do 6 issues this year. I'm going to get serious about it. I kind of got,
Cool.
I kind of got where I want to go with this now. So,
And it's all photos. I mean,
yep,
there's no words, there's no stories. It's
it's
straight from.
yeah, it's all pictures.
Nice, nice. All right, well, I got a book.
Okay, what is it? I can't.
We were we were going to talk about war photography a little bit. This is Robert Kappa's Slightly Out of Focus. So I think I got this book for $10.
You want me
Okay,
to
I
put? You
mean,
want me to link to that? I will link to that.
you don't
I
you don't
read
have to
it
put a
like
link.
30 years ago. You know.
You don't have to necessarily put a link to it, but it's very relatable to some of the stories that we've heard. People and not just these, but even Smolin and Pierce and Youngie. You go off somewhere to some place, and then one thing happens, and next thing you know, you don't come back for 11 months,
Yeah, yeah,
and you think you're going to be there, and then you get an assignment. Um, I mean, even McNally talked about that. He was going over to make a picture of like I forgot who Peter Jennings or something, and then he ends up going to the Vatican. And anyway, this book, I mean, is very much about that kind of thing with Robert Capa. It reads like a novel. I mean, he wrote it basically as a novel. It was supposed to be anyway. It's absolutely like a page turner. You sit down, you start reading the first paragraph, you can't stop reading it. So
Right,
it's a
right.
great one, and in general, I think it's just a good example of like this is a $10 book I found at a used bookstore in Omaha. So I mean, if a guy from Nebraska is reading books like this, like anyone can get on Amazon, find the used version of this for probably $5.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll link to it.
So yeah. So anyway, that's that. All right. Well, it
Okay.
was good
Thanks,
talking to you.
Paul. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll talk to you. Let's
Well,
talk again
yeah, we got to do this
before.
again soon.
Yeah. Okay.
So we got a lot of content to get through. So, all
Okay.
right. I'll look forward to the next podcast coming out soon too, as well.
Okay. Thank you. Ciao.
All right.